Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. This is your host, Julia, and I am so thrilled to share an egg donation story. You will notice that the guest in the story has chosen to remain anonymous, and that is because she has a complicated relationship with the recipients of her eggs. We'll get into that in a minute. So she has asked us to call her Rovy Wade. Rovy learned about egg donation in her early 20s and decided, yes, I will become a donor. This decision point is one of personal fascination to me because I have a little donor-conceived son, and I've always wondered who was the person who chose to give his sperm so that I could have the family of my dreams. So I get to ask Rovy that. I get to ask, what drove you to donate your eggs? And we're going to talk all about that. We're also going to talk about the relationship she has with the family that was the recipients of her eggs. In fact, she has become like a beloved other adult or maybe even an aunt type figure for the kids whom she helped conceive, essentially her biological or genetic offspring. That's a really interesting dynamic, and it's something that not all donor-conceived children have in their life, is the person who helped bring them into this world stays in their life. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And finally, we're going to talk about this ironic moment where the story that was so compelling for Rovy to donate her eggs was hearing about a woman who was facing infertility in her 40s. And later, when Rovy becomes close to 40 herself, she too faces infertility, and that story becomes her story also. So we're going to talk about donor conception. We're going to talk about family relationships between a donor and the recipient family. And we're going to talk about later having experienced infertility yourself. It's a tremendous episode. If you love it as much as I do, don't forget to share it with a friend. You never know who might be considering donating or receiving eggs or sperm. And don't forget to like and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And finally, don't forget to sign up for the Stork'd newsletter. Here is Rovy. Thank you so much for joining Stork'd. I'm so excited to talk to you. There's a lot for us to dive into. I'll start by saying this, and I actually don't know that you know this part, which is that I have known about your story for many years through your sister. And in some ways, you were an expander for me before I even began my journey, because you were one of the first people I knew who chose to do something outside of the traditional path. And I'm really excited to talk to you about that.
I'm a chef. I'm a mom. I was an executive chef in New York City for about 20 years, so I had a very fast-track lifestyle. And long story short, when I had my son, a bunch of stuff happened. And then my mom got sick, my adopted mom, and we moved to Connecticut, and I completely switched gears and became a stay-at-home mom, private chef, and full-time caretaker for my parent. And that's what I've been doing basically for the last 5 years.
That's amazing. Talk about a big life shift. Let's go back to the beginning, because it sounds like you've had a couple of big life shifts. My understanding is that your family life has had a couple of different turns, starting with when you were a kid, and then ultimately in your 20s, you chose to be an egg donor. And then you had your own family building journey, and you ultimately just described being at a point in your family life where you're a caretaker for your parents, your family, in a different way. So there's a lot of different facets. Let's talk about the egg donor experience. You in your 20s decided to become an egg donor. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted that? I don't think yet in my 20s, I even know what an egg donor was. Where did this desire, interest, decision come from?
So it's going to sound really cheesy, but I promise it's 100% true. I married really young. I married my first boyfriend, who I met my freshman year in college at Vassar. We moved to Seattle briefly, because that's where my biological dad was. And my parents had a very complicated, abusive relationship and divorce. So we ended up in Seattle because I needed to be there as a monitor for my youngest sister to make sure that she was safe. So we were there just for a year before she was going to boarding school. And we were sitting at home in our apartment in Seattle one night, and there was literally a Dateline special. And it was this special about, hey, there's all these infertile couples and there's this new technology that's totally experimental, but it's called egg donation. And they had these like 3 stories about couples that couldn't have children and these women who went through this experimental procedure to extract their eggs and they all got babies. And my husband and I at the time, we had decided we didn't want children. Again, we were 23 years old. So, but his parents had been through an awful divorce. My parents had been through an awful divorce. We were like, we don't want children. We don't want children who would have to go through this kind of trauma. Mm-hmm. And so we saw this special and they had this phone number you could call at the end if you were interested to get on a list. And so it was that simple. Like we called and that was it. And then I want to say a year later, we moved back to New York and we got a phone call from a hospital in Livingston, New Jersey that said, your name was on this list. Are you still open to it? And we were like, I don't know. And they were like, well, you could get paid and we have student loans. So we were like, we're listening. And so we went to this hospital and it was a huge deal. Like they took blood. There was a 5-hour psychological exam, physical exam, all this stuff. And you didn't get paid for it, but we did it because we had nothing else to do anyway. Like we were recent college grads and working and nothing to do on the weekends. So we did it. And then a few weeks later, we got a call back saying, we think we have a family match for you. Would you be willing to come back to the hospital and meet them? So we did that and we met the family in the room, with a doctor and a psychiatrist, psychologist present. So they introduced us and, they explained the family situation, which was a very compelling situation. So we met and we said, okay, I'm open to it. Let's continue the dialogue. They asked for permission to contact us outside of the hospital, which we were more interested in anyway. So they contacted us. We had dinner in the city. They put us up at a hotel, which was really cool. And we had dinner. We got to hear more about where they grew up and their whole life story. And then long story short, we agreed to do the egg donation. At the time, I believe, and again, we were willing to do it for free. At the time, it was $5,000 to do it. And we were great. That's icing on the cake. We just wanted to help them.
So your desire to help them, was that still informed by this mental picture that you had from the show that you had watched, which indicated how beneficial this was? Or at that point, was it that you had gotten to know them and there was something about them that really tugged at your heartstrings?
It was definitely their personal story. I mean, the mom's personal story was she didn't get married till she was 40. As soon as they got married, they were trying to start a family. When things didn't start right away, they went to the doctor and she didn't find out till she was 40 that she was only born with one ovary.
Oh, and interesting.
Because she was only born with one ovary, she had all the cards stacked against her. And she hadn't done, not if you did something wrong, you still don't deserve a baby, but she'd done everything right. And focused on her career and made sure that she was financially secure so that she could provide everything for her children when she decided to have them. And then when she decided to have them, it turned out she was not built to have them. Mm-hmm. So that, for me and for my husband at the time, because, I think it's important to include him, even though he's my ex-husband now, but I would not have made that decision if he'd been against it. So he was with me every meeting for everything. He was with me for the extraction. He was with me. He was the one shooting hormones in the butt with the HCG at the end of the day. So he had to deal with me, blowing up like a tick and having mood swings and all this stuff when we went through the process of doing this. So he gets a lot of credit.
And do you guys have those difficult conversations? Do you sit down and say, what does this mean for us? Why are we doing this? Or was it sort of just looking at one another and saying, you're in, I'm in, let's do it?
We were young. I feel and again, you wouldn't be coming to someone my age for eggs at this I feel like the beauty of egg donation is you're only going to do it when you're really young. And when you're really young, you're not thinking about the long-term cons. You're just thinking about doing something good. It's like giving blood. You know what I mean? That's the way we looked at it, was like, I've got this stuff to give. I don't need it. I don't care about it. If it can help somebody, great. And it feels good. So to do something nice. So let's do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the other thing I'm hearing is that there wasn't really a lot of guidance or counseling from the agency, the egg donation agency, until the point where you were in the room with a potential family. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, at the time that we did it, looking back now, we were probably one of the first couples. I don't think we were the first couple to donate in the country, but we were like, it was way at the beginning. I mean, we're going back to 1999. So, at the time when we saw it again on Dateline, it was like, this is a brand new thing, like news alert. So we were on board with that right after. So, at the time, as what they told us when we went to Livingston, New Jersey, was that they were the only hospital in the country doing this at that time. So what they told us was like, people are flying from all over the country to come here to get donations of eggs.
Wow. That's astounding. How does it feel to be one of the first to do something?
It didn't feel particularly special at that point. Again, it was just something that, we met this amazing couple. They really wanted children. We really didn't at that time. And you're like, if we can help you, the way I describe it is, I was just the drop kicker, like mom carried the football. I just punted. So that was how I thought of it. Was just, I just went the ding and like mom carried it, all the way down.
Awesome. I love that analogy. I mean, it's a really clear way to visualize how you felt about your role at the time.
Yeah. And it's still how I feel.
So tell us what happened next. So you've made the decision, you're married at the time with a partner who's on board with this. It's early days, so you're not paid a ton. Did you guys have to sign any legal documents, or what were some of the other things?
There was definitely I remember we spent a lot of time in different rooms. Like I had to take the whole, whatever that psych eval test. There's like an acronym for it. That's like 5,000 pages. I had to meet with psychiatrists, psychologists. They tons of blood work, tons of paperwork, trying to follow whatever family history I had back to collect it for their file. And then once all that was done, there was a waiting period until we heard back saying, okay, the family's seen everything. They still want to move forward. And then we went in and they basically just gave us a rundown of like, this is what's going to happen. So like, here's a giant bag of drugs and needles. This is your schedule, printed on a piece of paper. They showed us, how to do it like once. I have to say, like, it wasn't very clear. It was sort of like, you're going to take this needle and you're going to like jab it in your thigh, like 3 times a day, this much. And they kind of showed us like how to take stuff out of the bottle. They didn't show us like how to stick the needle in. They just told us how. We basically went home and you wait until the donor recipient, they get her on a schedule first, hormone wise. So once they have her going, that's when they call you and tell you, okay, now you've got like a 2-3 week regimen you have to follow. So she's on a schedule where she's going to be ready in 3 weeks to receive an egg. So they, worked her up. And now that I've actually done this, which is ironic as a mom, I'm like, now I know what it is. But they basically call you one day and are like, okay, you've still got the bags of drugs in the fridge and you still got all the needles. And we're like, yeah. They're like, okay, so tonight you're going to start your regimen. And so basically for 3 weeks, you do this regimen where you take whatever hormone, 2 times a day, 3 times a day. And then basically at the end of it, when you are bloated and look like a tick about to pop, there's a big needle of HCG that has to go in your ass, and you can't do it yourself because it's intramuscular. So somebody has to do it for you. And that's the night before you donate. So at that point, all the hormones have basically driven your ovaries into overdrive to produce as many eggs as physically possible at that time. And then what the HCG shot does is it releases them. So the minute you get it in, you've basically got 24 hours to get to the clinic for them to suck out all the eggs before they pop.
I appreciate the clarity with which you're talking about this because, sometimes we've had doctors and stuff and they talk about it in these flowery terms.
No, it's very like the first time I donated, it was a hot mess. Like you lose bowel movement at that point. Like it's very uncomfortable. Like I've done it 3 times total. The first time we had no idea. We were like, oh, they're putting us up at a hotel in Livingston, New Jersey. Like, let's go to a water park. I'm not kidding. It was like the middle of the summer and it was 100 degrees. So my husband was like, let's go to a water park. And I was like, yeah, I've never been to a water park. Have you? He's like, no. And like literally I'm going down a water slide and I got off the water slide and I was like, I need a bathroom like right now. And he was like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know. I have no control over my faculties right now because these hormones are like,
they're
intense. You're not have that much hormone in you. So like,
yeah.
ever.
And I'm sure anyone who's gone through either an egg donation or an egg extraction or an IVF treatment is so relating to this right now because we talk about hormones, we talk about all this stuff, but it is like the literal physical experience of it is so intense and so visceral. So thank you for illustrating it in that way.
I was 24 years old, and at that time they didn't know. So nobody told us. Nobody said like, hey, the last couple of days you might want to like stay close to home or close to like nobody told us that. They just said, and here's a paper bag of drugs, like go have fun.
How far we've come, right?
Yeah.
So you said you've done this 3 times. Was the first one was for donation purposes?
The first time we got 10 eggs, they implanted 3. So in general, when they implant, they do implant 3. So they warn the recipient that you could have twins or triplets. And they warn the donor, like, just so you know, this is what we're doing.
Now, when they said, just so you know, this is what you're doing, was it like you will have between 1 and 3 biological babies out there in the world? Did they explain to you like the emotional or the tangible implications of this?
No, not at all. It was more when I woke up from the procedure, they were like, congratulations, you had 10 good follicles. And they informed me we're implanting 3 of those viable follicles. And I think they said they were going to try and freeze the rest, but I don't think they did. I think at the time, the family that was receiving was just happy to have the 3. I'm trying to remember back. I don't want to misspeak. I think they asked if like they could use them for science or something. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I think they were like, if we freeze them for something. And I said, no, if the family's not going to use them, you can use them for science, otherwise destroy them. So I think they had asked, can we freeze them for like somebody else to use? And I was like, oh, hell no. Like, I know this family. Like, I've met this family. That's fine. But like, I don't want to exactly have like a child walk, date someone in college. And it turns out they're like siblings or something.
Absolutely. Which is a huge concern in the donor conception world.
Absolutely. So that happened. And then what happened was a couple years later, the family approached me and said, we'd like to have a sibling for their child. And of course, like, you can't say no. So
you could, but you chose not to.
You could, but they were really nice. And I was like, I if it was me, would I be okay with someone being like, no, you only get 1? So I was like, no.
Did you feel like a gatekeeper to their family dreams at that point?
I would, no. I mean, again, I was like, at that point, I was like, what, 26? And again, wasn't planning on having kids. So it was more just, it was less about that. It was more like I knew what was coming with like the hormones and everything. So I just was like, and I got to get the bag of needles again. So it was more that, honestly, than it was about the other thing.
So it was more the physical than the emotional, and to some extent. Yeah.
But no, I have to say, like, the first time I took it very seriously, and like the doctor's like, you have to eat clean, be clean, no drinking, no smoke. They said you have to pretend like you're pregnant, which I did the first time. The second time, I was 26. I was working for a celebrity chef. I was partying a lot. So when they approached me, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I wasn't eating clean. I wasn't not drinking. And long story short, we did the extraction and the eggs didn't stick. And I blame myself to this day for that because I think I gave bad eggs. And I know there's no scientific basis behind it, but I do blame myself to this day for that because I was completely irresponsible during the entire process. The second time, I just was like, I don't care. It's summer. I'm partying. I'm in my mid-20s. I'm with all these chefs. Like, I don't really care. But when I found out it didn't take, or it did take, but the mom had an ectopic pregnancy and almost died, which is really scary.
Really scary. That's a lot. I mean, if you're saying you blame yourself, that's a lot to carry.
Yeah. So I felt really bad because I felt like, okay, this is my fault. I mean, obviously I couldn't cause her ectopic pregnancy, but I figured, there must have been something wrong with it. So again, a couple more years passed by and then they approached and said, would you be willing to go one more time? And I said, okay. And they said, this time we want to give you something because I was starting my own business. And they were like, I was like, I'm not doing it for the money. And they're like, we know, but like, we're not willing to take this unless you let us give you something. So, they gave me like $15,000. Yeah, which again, I was like, I'm not in this for it. Then they're like, it's for your business. Like, it's not for you. You're starting a business. It's a business donation. So we're like, okay. So we did it the third time. And the funny part was, now I'm 30, 20, 29, 30. This time they said like, we actually only got like 4 eggs. So the doctor was like, just, like your egg supply, not it's dwindling, but like just, when you get ready to plan your family, like you might want to think about that like sooner rather than later. And I was like, yeah, okay, in the middle of my career. Bye.
So were you able to process that information or were you just sort of storing it for later?
Yeah, I was storing it for later. I kind of was like, it's not affecting me directly. It's as long as the family is getting what they need. I mean, it did process like, okay, I guess I'm not producing 10 at a time anymore. But I was like, okay, well, I'm a little bit older. And like, again, you only need 1 to make baby. But yeah, the third one stuck. That one stuck. And the amazing thing with this parent is she carried 2 totally healthy pregnancies. She had 2 totally healthy natural births, no C-section, no drama, like literally walked to the hospital in labor across the Upper East Side both times, like holding on to light poles and like not fire hydrants, and had 2 totally healthy, amazing babies. So
awesome.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know how you can beat that. So, especially when it finally came to be my turn, I'm like, we had like every nightmare scenario known to man. So,
and I definitely want to talk about that. One thing that's unusual about your story is it's not like you gave the eggs and remained anonymous to this family or never saw them again. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship, the sustained relationship?
Sure. I definitely wasn't expecting to have a relationship with the recipient family. They reached out and asked if I would be open to it. And again, at the time, I was really young. I want to make it very clear, like they weren't overstepping. They weren't taking advantage. They weren't doing anything untoward. I think, were very much the same as I was, learning about this new thing and completely kind of innocent and scared and feeling their way out and kind of being, hey, you're with us on this. Are you okay staying with us on this? And if you're not, like, we'll never bother you again. And I was like, no, like, I'm cool. Like, we both live in the same city. Like, I'm in Brooklyn, you're in Manhattan. Sure, like, what do you want to do? And they were like, would you be cool with, like, visiting the kids a couple times a year, like on birthdays, on holidays? We'll introduce you as, like, a friend of the family. And I was like, sure, like, that's totally cool. And that's honestly how it started. And honestly, after we talked about it, I don't think I actually met either of the kids until they were 2, 3, 4 years old. So, I mean, for both of them, like, I remember when I met I don't want to use names. So I remember when I met the first one, she was she might have been 2 or 3. And we met a few times. Like, it was always on their turf. It was always at their house or like at a diner or in the park. And we met like a couple times a year. But then when I gave the second time, there was a big gap, which makes sense because the recipient was pregnant and then she had the baby.
She was in the thick of the new babyhood.
And I also like wasn't eager to like get in on that again because I was in my 20s and I was in the middle of a chef career. So like, I always hung back and I waited for them to reach out. I never reached out.
What did the meetups feel like when you were with them the first and second times?
They're my little sisters or like cousins. Like, I definitely feel affection. Like, I definitely feel like they're part of the family, but I don't feel like they're my kids at all. Like, I feel like they're my sister's kids or cousins. Like, I feel familial towards them. I definitely feel protective towards them. Like, I remember one time, like, when one of them was a baby, like, we were at the diner and she like went to run across the street. And I literally like, it was the first time in my life I had that maternal instinct of like, and like, threw myself out of a chair and was going to, throw myself in front of a car to save the child. But other than that, until I had my son, I never felt like anything like that. And today I called them my goddaughters, and they're very much my goddaughters and they're very much part of my life. But we don't talk every day. We don't even talk every week. Like, do we text? Yeah. Like, my oldest right now, she sends me books once a month that she's reading. She's in grad school, so we have our own little book club and we read books together and we text each other about what we think about the books. I hang back even more because the older one, I know at some point she's going to do 23andMe and this whole thing's going to blow up, but she's very practical like her father and she's very down to earth, and I know she'll process it and be okay with it. The younger one, it's a lot more dramatic and emotional and she's going to be a hot mess. So I've extracted myself from our relationship in the last couple of years because I'm afraid of that. So
you have, since the first time that you met them, you said a couple years in and then a couple years the next time, deepened your relationship to such a point where you consider them your goddaughters. And yet now you're worried about the fallout when they learn that you're more than a godmother, that you're a biological contributor.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I wish I'd had a parent or like an adult at some point back in the past who'd been like, hey, did you know that there's going to be this thing called ancestry DNA in the future and they'll be able to find you? And, and how would you feel in the future if they found out? Like, I wish I'd thought about it. It wouldn't have changed what I did, but it might have changed how involved I was when they were young, of them being here every summer and staying with us and having overnights and having holidays together and, because now I feel like I'm going to be a little bit culpable of knowing and not telling them, or them being upset that I was somehow complicit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if somebody had told you when you donated, by the way, there is this technology that enables kids to figure out, or anyone to figure out, who's related to them by DNA. You go on his website and you find this out. How would that have changed the way in which you, like, would you have wanted to communicate it to them and say, guess what, guys, I am your biological parent. I've contributed DNA to make you. Or would you have wanted the parents to have communicated that? Or would you just have said, like you said, I'll take a step back?
We all had a conversation, and the father and I both agreed that we did not want the children to know. And the father didn't want them to know because he wanted the children to believe, and it's true, that their mom is their mom. Their mom is their mom. Their mom carried them, gave birth to them, like we have proof. So that was his reason. My reason was I wanted them to have a normal life. to be like, hey, I have a nuclear family. I have a mom and a dad. My mom gave birth to me. She's my mom. Like, I didn't want there to be a wrinkle that made them different from other kids. So we did actually have this conversation before they were born. And I said, like, I'm totally on board with the dad being like, they don't ever need to know this, because unless there's a medical issue, there's no reason for them to know, at least at that time. And again, you're talking to a 24-year-old. So like, judge, like judge the 24-year-old who's trying to be wise.
It's an unfair thing to hoist on a 24-year-old, right? This is the one of the reasons that this is a complicated industry is because of the relative age discrepancy between many of the parents, the intended parents, and many of the donors. That's a hard thing to navigate at 24. Hard for anyone.
Absolutely. And when we had to do, the ironic part is when we finally decided to start our own family when I was 40, which imagine the, I don't want to say psychological whiplash, but historical whiplash of, wow, now I understand what this couple was going through, because she was 40 when I did this for her. And now I'm 40 trying to start a family, and I have to do IVF on myself. And they're like, yo, we only got 2 eggs because you got none left because you gave them all away. And it's like, damn, like, it's ironic, and it didn't work, which was also ironic. My son was literally the miracle of my 40th birthday. We tried IVF. We tried 3 times with the 3 eggs I had left, and all 3 failed. They said, adopt more dogs. And we were like, yo, we're good with that. And we went to Costa Rica for my 40th birthday. And 6 weeks later, I wasn't feeling so hot. We went to the doctor, and my doctor started crying. She came in the room crying.
Wow.
I was like, my God, do I have cancer? Like, I was like, am I dying? And she was like, what were you doing on July 2nd? And I was like, that was my 40th birthday. And she was like, happy birthday, you're pregnant. Like, she never thought I would get pregnant. So, it was this full circle moment of appreciating how much this other family went through, trying so hard to have their children, and trusting another person like me to like provide a product that would enable them to do that. And we just got lucky that I was able to provide my own. And we're good at one and done. But it definitely was a full circle moment of being like, wow, now I get, like, if I was injecting myself for these people, now I'm injecting myself for myself. And it's like, wow, it sucks. But it makes you appreciate the process. So
when you were saying to yourself, I can't believe I have to go through 3 rounds of IVF and I might not get to have a child. And you said, it sucks. Like, this really sucks. And the irony of that. Were you mad at your earlier self for having donated? Or were you just like, this is interesting, a turn of events. This is interesting history. How were you thinking at the time?
I wasn't mad at myself. I mean, our IVFs failed because I had miscarriages, and, it took a while to find out that I had medical conditions that adds an extra wrinkle to these children, because we didn't discover my medical conditions until now that I'm later in life. So it turns out I have autoimmune diseases. It turns out I have some medical conditions that are quite complex and quite rare. And that was what caused the miscarriages. But it took having the miscarriages, if that makes sense, to see doctors to find out what was going on. As it was happening, no, I was never mad at myself for that. I did absolutely have a philosophical view on it of like, this is kind of ironic. But the way I looked at it was like, wow, like, this mom had to go through everything I'm going through right now, but she's still stuck with it. Whereas I was like, I don't know if I want to stick with it. Like, I want to go to vacation in Costa Rica and stop stressing about stuff. Like, I'm okay having another dog. I'm okay adopting. Like, I think the biggest stress on our relationship was my husband was not open to adoption. And I was like, I'm willing to stop anytime and just adopt a baby. Like, it doesn't have to be mine. Like, a baby is a baby. Again, I feel like everything happens for a reason. The timing just ended up being kismet that, we went on vacation to get rid of the stress of trying to have babies, and we had a baby. And I know everyone says that, and that's the only thing that pisses me off is when I go, see, the minute you stop stressing it, and I'm like, no, that's not what happened. Like, that's not why it happened. That's not how it happened. Like, I really don't believe that.
That shouldn't be the takeaway from this story. Just stop relaxing and you'll miraculously get pregnant.
So there were plenty of times when we weren't trying and we still didn't get pregnant. So, I do believe my 40th birthday was magical because we literally conceived on my 40th birthday. And I feel like that happened because that mom got pregnant with her baby when she was 40. So I do feel like there's some sort of, and that's just me trying to trying to create a story.
You're trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly.
It's confusing. I mean, life is confusing in general, but when you add all this family building stuff, sometimes it's nice to think that there's a miracle waiting for you because it's your 40th or because there's something special about the way the stars are aligned. In fact, I've actually interviewed an astrologer who will tell you when you're more likely to get pregnant based on your astrology. And I believe in that stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm like, listen, my sister, I don't know if she's actually met the girls, but, she didn't want to because she was so uncomfortable just with the concept for so many years. And it took a long time for me to kind of convince her, this is why we did it. This is why it's okay. But she's still afraid to meet them because she's afraid that, if they find out, then it's like, does she have a responsibility? Like, what is the context of the relationship? Which I understand, I wish she would meet them, but I also completely respect the fact that she wants to keep her distance. And she's like, that's your mess. You deal with it. And I'm like, it's not a mess.
Now, can you tell us a little bit? We sort of jumped from like two momentous fertility experiences, the donating eggs to your own infertility journey. But in between, there was some life-changing moments, one of which is that you decided to have kids when you said you never wanted them. What shifted between those two journeys?
So I never wanted kids. I was definitely clear on that. And then I met my husband and our relationship moved rather quickly. I mean,
and for clarity purposes, this is a second husband.
Yeah. So first husband, again, like right out of high school, and he's now remarried and we're friends on Facebook. So it's like all good. But yeah, so our marriage dissolved, no particular reason. Well, I decided to become a celebrity chef and he was a teacher and was like, why can't you stay home and start making babies? And I was like, because I got to go work in the kitchen till 2 a.m. So that was why our marriage dissolved. So very practical reasons. But again, nothing bad. So I was single for many years and then I met my husband and we started dating and within 6 months we were engaged. Within a year we were married and he made it very clear from the beginning that he wanted children. And he knew, he had known me. He had worked for my company before. We'd known each other tertiarily for about 10 years. He knew that I was like that. I'm never going to have kids person. But it wasn't an ultimatum. It was just like, this is something I want. And if you decide you can't do that, he also said that he was open to adoption and other things. So I was like, okay, like we'll deal with it when we cross that bridge. He's 7 years younger than me. So he was also, in my opinion, very young when we got married. I didn't have tons of time, but he had tons of time to figure this out. So, but once we got married and he expressed that, I decided I did, with him, I did want to have children. So we started trying actually while we were engaged. We were hoping to be pregnant by the time we got married. And that was when we realized like things weren't working because nothing was happening. So that was when we, started seeing a fertility specialist in Connecticut who, for the listeners out there, I would say be very skeptical of these fertility specialists because this guy took tens of thousands of dollars from us. And looking back, all he did was some blood tests and said that we had unspecified infertility, basically he was a BS artist, and we fell for it because we weren't informed and we weren't educated like we are now. And we kind of went with like the first person that we found who said they could help us. So we spent money we didn't have, and active credit card charges that we didn't need to have.
In hindsight, how would you have known he was a BS artist and the one who you ultimately worked with was the right one?
I would say what we didn't have that we have now, and this is going to sound really stupid, but, I belong to a mom's on Facebook page where everyone compares note cards on doctors, teachers, everybody, their neighbors. And, at that time when we were trying to get pregnant, that stuff, Facebook existed, but these
community groups,
communities didn't exist at the time. So, and again, we were very embarrassed about the fact that we weren't getting pregnant. So we weren't reaching out to people being like, hey, anybody got a fertility doctor? We were like kind of doing it on the DL where we were just like Googling like fertility doctor, so we just, okay, that guy has 5 stars. We went there. Is that stupid? Yes, looking back, but we, what were you going to do? Like if it was today, yeah, I would have gone on a Facebook page and been like, hey guys, anybody got a recommendation, and let everybody give all their comments, and then you would go to the person. But we didn't do that.
A lot has changed in your life and in the fertility space since you were an egg donor in your 20s. Looking back now, what would you change about the egg donation process or the industry? What would you do differently?
I think what's most important is that for the donor to understand all of the facets of medically what's involved, I think is very important. Not just, a piece of paper saying you're going to do this, but to say, hey, you're going to go through these hormonal changes. Here are these side effects that you might not be expecting. And also I think some psychological counseling would probably be a good idea, not just at the beginning, but also after donation, to make sure that the donor is okay, and, to counsel them through like what they did and the decision they made, and to make sure that they're like at peace with it, I guess I would say. And also for the parents, I don't know what the recipients received in terms of counseling and stuff. And, I don't think it's okay to say like, oh, well, they're just trying to get this thing so they can have a kid and they're walking away. I'm like, I think it's a big deal for them as well. I think it's actually probably a bigger deal to acknowledge, like, they're going to make a baby with somebody else's egg and they don't know where that person came from and they don't have all the answers, for that child that they're going to have. So I think it's important to make sure that they receive counseling throughout the entire thing.
Couldn't agree more. I got a lot of counseling as part of my fertility treatments to have a kid on my own. And that was sort of a strongly encouraged component of the protocol. So I would imagine it would be the same for the recipient. I don't know enough about egg donation to know if the donor gets the same counseling.
I got no counseling other than screening. So it wasn't counseling, screening to be like, let's make sure a psycho isn't donating an egg. That was basically the point of the screening, was like, are you schizophrenic? Let's find out in an hour or less. Having gone through IVF myself, I didn't get any counseling going through it. And I would say it was a pretty traumatic journey, especially having 3 or 4 miscarriages. So
how did you deal with the trauma? Did you just sort of push through it, or was there any sort of self-care or anything? Yeah.
No, we just pushed through it. I think like the only time it really hit us was like, I want to say the last one, because it had stuck for like 8 weeks when we lost it, I remember. my husband's friend, like they didn't know. He's like 7 years younger. So like, they weren't even married at the time. But like I remember two of his friends came over and we were from the city. We had moved to Connecticut. And they brought like flowers. And so like I walk out of my bedroom and he's in the living room and they had brought like bouquets of flowers. And I was like, what the actual fuck? Because they didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like they felt bad. He had told them we were pregnant. And I'd been like, don't tell anybody. Like this is why you don't tell people, because then, it's like a whole thing. And I just remember like walking out, seeing them holding bouquets of flowers, looking very awkward, and just walking into the kitchen and grabbing a bottle of bourbon and walking into the living room, slamming it on the table and being like, so who wants a drink? Like, and just kind of, that was how we dealt with it. But other than that, no, I mean, the other three, I was like, hey, it's a totally natural process. I mean, people don't talk about miscarriages. But most women have a few miscarriages. It's completely common. And the press and doctors call it a missed period, but it's a miscarriage. And
just because it's common doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it's not hurtful.
For me, when we were trying, like, except for the last time, just because we put so much money into it, like, I think if we hadn't put as much money into it, I wouldn't have been as emotionally invested. But, the other 3 times we had miscarriages, I was totally fine. I was at work one time and like I had to tell my best friend, who's a male chef, like, hey, I'm miscarrying. I got to like get out of here. But my boss was like, well, you're coming back. And like, we couldn't tell him I was having a miscarriage because I'm a chef. So like, I literally had to go to the clinic, get the DNC and come back to work like 2 hours. And I did. And I was like, emotionally, I was fine. Like physically, I was like, this freaking sucks. And I hate my boss. So, like one of them, I was working in Colorado and I just said I had a stomach ache and they gave me the afternoon off. It was fine. The one at Fairfield was pretty rough, because I had to go get a DNC and then go back to work. And that really, really sucked. And the guy who did my DNC was like very uncool doctor guy. Like I was literally in a chef uniform and being like, this is like my 4th miscarriage. And he was just like, oh, suck it up. It's just like a bad period. And I just remember looking at him being like, do you have a vagina? And he was like, what? And I was like, do you have a vagina? And he was like, no. And I'm like, so shut the fuck up. Like you have no idea. Just do it and get the hell out of the room. And I was like, by the way, I need a nurse in here right now. And he just like laughed and the nurse came in and I was like, that guy's an asshole. And she just didn't say anything. She just was standing behind him and smiled. And I was like, all right, yeah, this guy's an asshole.
There is no part of this particular portion of your story that is acceptable treatment of somebody who's going through a miscarriage. You should have some space to grieve and to heal physically. You shouldn't have to go right back to work. You should have a doctor who's respectful and not an asshole. I mean, every part of this story is making me like want to jump through the screen and scream at somebody.
Yeah, no, well, I'm as much to blame as anyone else because I didn't demand the space. And also as a female chef, pregnancy and motherhood is the main reason you don't see female executive chefs. Is you can be an executive chef as long as you're not pregnant or a mother. The minute that happens, you are eliminated from the space. So, and that absolutely happened to me as an executive chef. The minute I became pregnant, I didn't tell my company. I waited until I was 6 months pregnant, at which point my doctor was like, you have to tell them, because I was carrying 40-pound cases of chicken up fire escapes in the snow outside the city. And they were like, you have to tell your employers because you have placenta previa and vasa previa. And like, you have to tell them. And I was like, okay. And the minute I told them at 6 months pregnant that I was pregnant, I went from having 100% scores in terms of my reviews to absolutely sliding to the bottom. Even though I never missed a day of work, even though I had no staff turnover, even though my financial numbers were not only good, they got better. But all of a sudden, the execs at the company said, we don't like your attitude. You seem to be going a different direction than the rest of the company.
That's so upsetting. And so it sounds like, we've been talking a lot about the fertility component, but it sounds like the movement from a high-powered chef to mom was a really big transition point for you.
Absolutely. I didn't have a choice about it.
So you've gone through a lot of life shifts. Your family life has changed dramatically. It includes those people who are biologically yours, but that you're not raising. It includes your son, who was a long time coming and was a birthday miracle. And it includes siblings and parents, et cetera. How do you define family these days in the context of all that?
I mean, my definition of family since high school, I would say, has always been family are the people you choose, not the people who chose you. And I still stand by that. So, the people I call my parents are not my biological parents. They are the people who chose to adopt me when I was in high school and stand by me when they didn't need to. They had 3 of their own perfectly wonderful biological children. So my adopted mom is now in heaven. I was taking care of her for the last few years. And during COVID, she had FTLD, which is frontotemporal lobe dementia, which is different than regular dementia. It's a disease. And, and now my adopted dad has lung cancer. He's 86 years old. Girl, he beat colon cancer like twice. So, this guy is the Terminator. He's impossible to kill. So he's, for what it is, he's doing great. But yeah, we're looking at the end, and that sucks. The way I've always been is like, okay, let's keep trucking. Let's face the next challenge and deal with it and try and make the best of it.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of this. I think we've only scratched the surface of what is a very interesting and complicated family life, as much as we can do in an hour podcast. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you really want to get out?
Yeah, just, anyone who has a blended family or a different looking family, again, they're the people you choose to love, not necessarily the people who chose to bring you into the world. And that's okay.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, it's something to be celebrated and something to be loved. And that's it.
That's beautiful. It is such a pleasure to talk to you. I adore your sister and by extension you. And I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.